Okay, on the stage currently we have Alla Serebrianskaia, who's a partner at Asensi, Abogados. Next person up is Pedro López Martín-Andino, who's managing partner at Martín-Andino, Abogados. And then finally, the furthest away from me is Xavi Munoz Bellvehí, who's a partner at ECIJA. So the first thing I'm going to do is just from Pedro down the line, if you could just tell us in a couple of sentences a bit more about you, your background, and your specialist areas, and then we'll crack on with a couple of the talking points.
Yes, thanks, Tom, for moderating the panel, and also thanks to Willem for this great initiative, as usual, of organizing gaming in Spain. My name is Pedro López, and I am the managing partner of a law firm called Martín-Andino Abogados, based in Madrid. We particularly deal with IT, TMT matters, and have a very strong gaming and online gaming practice.
Okay, Alla.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Alla Serebrianskaia. I'm partner at Asensi Abogados, and we are a boutique law firm specialized in in gaming and gambling. We represent a considerable number of operators, providers, both at online and land-based level.
Hello, everyone. I'm Xavi Munoz. I'm partner in the law firm. I do the gaming, gambling, but also telecoms, internet, etc. And the law firm is called ECIJA. We are 550, mainly between Spain and Latin America and Portugal. And then in Spain, around 200 or something. So it's quite a big law firm. Of course, we do gambling, but we do everything.
Excellent. Thank you very much for joining us. So the idea of this session is really to give everyone a quick overview of the key developments in a few areas of compliance over the last 12 months and things to look out for in the next 12 months moving forward. So these areas are AML, GDPR, corporate criminal liability, try and give some advice to the new entrants into the Spanish market about what their reporting duties to the DGOJ might be, and then also talking about the likelihood and practicalities of M&A activity in the Spanish market. And I think a key phrase that came out of the morning session from Juan was about fostering diligence as around compliance, and I think that's something that's probably going to run through everything that we talk about here. So I'm going to start with Pedro. Pedro's going to kick us off with a bit of an update on specifically AML and GDPR for the Spanish market. Over to you.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, first of all, and with regard to AML matters, I think that the most important news that we have in Spain during the last 12 months has been the final implementation of the fourth AML directive. So for those of you that are familiar with AML matters, this could sound surprising given the fact that the fourth AML directive should have been implemented on July 2017. So in Spain, we have implemented this directive with a lot of delay, especially due to the political instability that we have already spoken about. And well, I think that most important and particularly for new operators and for new entrants in the Spanish market is the fact of being aware that there is a high territorial component, and particularly given the fact that the operators, of course, Spanish operators, will have to report to the Spanish AML authority, but operators from other countries that obtain Spanish licenses will also have to report to the Spanish local AML body and also to comply with AML laws and regulations. Fortunately, there is a high degree of uniformity on AML regulations in all European Union jurisdictions, given the fact that they arise from EU directives, but still there are some particularities and some specific points in which the Spanish legislation could differ. Therefore, the operators have to be very, very aware of this fact, given the fact, besides that money laundering is one of the red lines in which obviously the regulatory authorities are highly and extremely concerned. Or just to give you an example of some local obligations, there is an issue that I always advise my clients to be aware of that has to do with the yearly audit. Companies, AML companies that have to comply in Spain with the AML regulation have to go through a yearly audit in order to ensure that they are complying correctly and that their procedures are up to date. And most important, the experts that conduct these audits have to report to the AML authority which companies they have done the audits. Therefore, for the AML authority, it could be possible to determine who is complying well and who is not complying or is complying in a defective manner, given the fact that the Spanish AML authority will have the list of those companies that follow and that make this yearly audit. And to quickly finalize, two issues that are new after the implementation of the 4AML directive in the Spanish regulation, and which are significantly important, are first of all the whistleblowing line. Operators must have a whistleblowing line that can allow employees to communicate, even in an anonymous manner, possible breaches of the AML regulation. This instrument can be more generic and cover other areas. And another issue has to do with the so-called highly ethical standards of employees. Operators will have to follow certain procedures when they hire their employees to ensure that they have a minimum degree of honorability, and will have to conduct employee screenings, like, for example, asking for criminal records. Okay, so, well, on the AML block, I think that this is a more high-level view on what has happened during the last 12 months.
Okay, and how about in the GDPR space? Is that
okay? Well, GDPR, and well, I will be brief. I think that the most important news about GDPR is that there have already been almost 1.5 years since the approval of GDPR, and well, companies have survived. But obviously, this time gives us sufficient length to understand what are the main difficulties, the main challenges that companies have to face in connection with GDPR. Everybody knows, well, particularly the risk-based approach. Companies will have to conduct an assessment, tailored assessment on their main risks, and how to amend and mitigate those risks. And I would like to focus on a specific point which could be critical for operators, and particularly for gaming operators, which is data breaches. As far as I know, so far there haven't been major or important data breaches in the gaming industry, in the online gaming industry. Given the fact that online gaming operators deal with data that could be sensitive, such as, for example, exclusions, the possibility that a hacker could access this database and disclose this type of data could have really very critical consequences for operators, given the fact that they will have to report to the regulator, they will even have to report to the affected persons, and besides facing potential fines, this will have a very negative reputational consequences. So it's clear to me that GDPR has to be taken very seriously. If you want to comply with GDPR well, and obviously this is the recommendation, to comply well, you have to invest many human material resources, and you have to take things very seriously.
Yeah, I think that point about trust, not only for existing customers if there's a data breach or misuse of data, but the industry as a whole. It comes back to what we were saying earlier about this perfect storm of big tech and the way our data is used. So I think that's a really important point.
To link it a little bit with M&A, GDPR is impacting in M&A due diligences, and as a result in how is the word? Deal-making activity.
Oh, okay.
Because in deal-making activities, because definitely it's well, there have been M&A transactions that had not progressed because of concerns around target companies' data protection and compliance with GDPR. Well, and can I add just one comment, please? And even it's not directly related with AML, I want to point out how important it is for operators now to have also a fraud prevention manual. Because while during the first and second licensing process, for example, in Spain, operators had to have only an AML manual, which was subject to the review of the AML authorities, which is the SEBLAC. Now, since 2 years ago, the DGOJ is focusing a lot on fraud, also because of the activity, that's match-fixing scandals and so on that we have seen. And for example, now during this third licensing process, operators had to submit a separated and differentiated AML manual and fraud prevention manual. In this sense also, as Pedro, you said, operators have to report to SEBLAC whenever there is a suspicious transaction for money laundering. But operators have to be aware also that they need to collaborate with the DGOJ, with Sigma, especially, which is a platform that the DGOJ created back in 2017, precisely to combat, to identify, and to fight against fraud and match fixing, and to promote sports integrity and ethics. So also the DGOJ, and as this morning we saw, has created, for example, the phishing tool, Phishing Alert, which is a tool to identify identity fraud, to detect fraud on identity. And also the DGOJ, for example, published a note on fraud management, which is also a very good tool and of a very great help for operators to prepare their fraud prevention manual. So just to make aware operators that it's also a very important aspect.
Make lives a little bit easier. Yeah. One of the other points that and we're just going to dedicate a bit of time to each of these subjects so we don't run out of time, but one of the other subjects we spoke about was corporate criminal liability. I don't know who wants to answer this, but how serious should operators be taking this right now?
Okay, I think it would be me for this one. Okay. Well, first of all, I would like to say that on compliance in general, AML, GDPR, etc., corporate criminal liability, but also regulatory gaming, gambling regulatory obligations, quarterly, monthly, etc., and other things as ICOs and all this. I think for operators, it's very important to tackle everything all together, okay? Because I think this is here and it will stay, and it will increase, and it will never go now. I mean, it will be more and more stringent. And it's the same, you have to think that it's like your accountancy. I mean, this is something that you have to do, whether you like it or not. It might be very boring, it might be very, whatever, but you need to put people doing this. I mean, companies, if you look at your accountancy department, you want accounts, financial analysts, you want the payment of the taxes, the payroll, you want everything working together in a tool and everything working smoothly. Okay, so I think companies like you that have so many obligations, okay, because it's not a company that sells bread, okay, it's a gambling operator that holds money from end users, etc. So you will always be very tied with these regulations. I think you have to tackle these all together, because at the end, all these regulations most of the times ask for the same. Fraud manual, ethical code, whistleblowing, etc. So all these rules ask for the same. So if you put it all together, you can save a lot, okay? And then, so these are from a general point of view. Then on the corporate criminal liability in Spain, as in other countries in Europe, and this is mainly only for the concept that you know, because maybe this is a big unknown sometimes for companies. Companies can be criminally liable in Spain. Okay, how can they be? If they would be, they can get a fine, they can be asked to dissolve, or they can be, that their activity can be, let's say, revoked, inhabilitada, okay, in Spanish. But and how can this happen? This can happen in two ways, okay? If the directors, executives of the company do some criminal activity in favor of the company, okay? We're not saying criminal activity that they do on their own. It has to be something that reports favorably, directly or indirectly favorably to the company. So this is one option. Or the company can also be rendered liable if some of the employees do that, okay? So then the way to avoid this liability or to reduce as maximum as possible this liability is for the company to implement surveying and monitoring and a control system, okay? This is the way to show to the authorities that you took all the measures that you could to prevent crimes within your organization, okay? There's very few companies that implement these systems, okay? But then going back to my comment, I mean, all these systems are very similar to AML, GDPR, so it's not that difficult for companies to implement that, okay, if they take it all together and implement those rules. So just for you to know that companies can be criminally liable and that there's ways to reduce or avoid that, okay? That's, I would say, you know, in a very high...
Yeah. No, that's good. That's a good explanation. Pedro?
Yeah, I would like to add something to what Xavi has explained. Because some operators, it's obvious and evident that a Spanish gaming company of Spanish nationality and based in Spain will be subject to this regime. But this could also affect an operator from another country, an EU country that has Spanish gaming licenses, for example, in Malta. As you know, criminal law is based on a key principle, which is the territoriality principle. So wherever the territory or the place where the potential crime could have incurred is where the competent courts and of justice will be. So if an employee of a Malta-based company that has Spanish licenses travels to Spain and incurs in some type of issue, let's say fraud, bribery, that the Spanish criminal courts could be competent, and this regime that Javier has pointed out would definitely apply. So it's important to be aware of this.
For the 30 licensees waiting to enter the Spanish market, it seems quite daunting, you know, for various different reasons at the moment. Alla, can you give any advice to the new entrants to the market from a compliance point of view and what to expect in terms of the reporting to the DGOJ?
Yeah,
so
well, my advice to new entrants is to be compliant from the very first day. to be compliant, not only with the specific periodical reporting obligations to the DGOJ, like by the deadline, but also, and I would say mainly, in the practical implementation and compliance with the regulatory requirements and specific and technical specifications, as it is, for example, to apply the slot session limits and not to send commercial communications to players that are self-excluded, to control the players' deposit limits, etc. I mean, after these 8 years of regulated market, things have changed. And the trend has changed, and the trend of the DGOJ now currently is to reinforce and to strengthen the strict compliance with the regulation. And perhaps this is not only a trend and a change in the behavior of our regulator, but of the market itself, because we all, industry stakeholders, we all now have more experience, a deeper, greater knowledge and understanding of the market, and we all somehow are involved and interested in having competitive, consider increasingly mature day by day, but safe and healthy, responsible market. So in our experience, we see that the DGOJ has increasingly increased their supervision, control, and sanctioning activities and works. That's why my recommendation is to the new entrants is to be compliant from the first day, because there is no time and there is no place now for an adaptation period as we had during after the second licensing process, and of course the first one when we had a transitory period. Just to give a few examples of this change in the trend regarding the reporting duties. For example, operators need to submit every quarter the so-called activity data report to the DGOJ, which includes information as it is, for example, new users registered, deposits, total deposits, amount of bonuses released, granted bonuses, GGR, turnover per type of product. Well, before, in my opinion, according to my experience, the main purpose of these activity data reports were for the DGOJ to publish the quarterly statistics on the evolution of the market, and we almost never received a comment from the DGOJ as to the content itself. Now, things are absolutely different. Now, it's very important to comply with the deadline and to submit this activity data report by the deadline but now the DGOJ reviews every data, every number that is included in that report. And they have a very strong team behind, and as Juan Espinosa said this morning, an automated process now, which compares this data with the data reported through the ICS, through the SAFE. So they are now behind, they are controlling the activity, they are seeing if there is an error or not, why you are reporting this GGR, why we see that this doesn't match, and in practical terms it's not the same. So it's not only important to comply with the deadline, but to focus on the content and to be precise and correct, because otherwise the DGOJ is behind, asking for clarifications. And then my recommendation is to be transparent for the DGOJ to understand the business model and maybe to help with that error, or maybe to act consequently, I mean.
I think that's good advice. I think, yeah, increasingly less room for error in these things, and ignorance is not an excuse, right?
Yes, yes. Not now.
So just like to spend the last couple of minutes, and Xavi, this is something that you want to particularly talk about, is around the prospect of M&A activity in the Spanish market. And I guess to begin with, what do you think would be, you guys are obviously, feel free to chip into this as well, what would be the drivers for that over the course of the next 12 to 18 months, and how do you see that progressing?
Yeah, well, we see this maybe starting already because we see that there's companies that come to us and they're looking to maybe acquire or invest in gambling operators, because, you know, the situation of the licensing being closed and open every 2-3 years, it generates these bags of, you know, situations that maybe new entrants need to buy a company. So we think there will be a consolidation in the market in the next 2 years, and we're seeing this from demands. And we think we will get also offers in the next 2 years of companies maybe coming and saying, you know, we would like to sell, or we would need an investor. Okay, and on this, I think for the audience and the ones that maybe deal with this, what I think it's important is for you to know, you know, what's the frame that you can work with in this type of transactions, whether if you are a seller or you are a buyer, okay? Of course, the buyer will want to pay the minimum price possible in the transaction, and of course, the seller will want to get the greater price possible, okay? And I think there's ways around this, and that this is possible, okay? That the seller gets the great price and the buyer pays a very small price, okay? Although it seems difficult, okay? And but basically, the way it's, I mean, you have to think first, what are you selling when you are a gambling operator? You're selling a license, you're selling a software, you're selling a client base, you're selling a team, you're selling a time to market, and, you know, and maybe some other things. So that's what you're selling, okay? So if there's a buyer that comes to you and all these fits for the buyer, okay, we would call it like a full fit, okay? So in this case, the buyer will be happy to pay for everything, okay, because he needs everything. Okay, so in that case, you know, I think buyer and seller will be happy because, you know, the buyer is happy to pay, you know, a considerable amount, and the seller is getting priced and valued for everything he has, okay? Actually, a couple of years ago, we did a transaction like this, a company called Suertia, and actually was, you know, the buyer wanted everything, okay? So it was great because everyone was happy, you know, everything was put in value, okay? But in many occasions, it might happen that it's not the case. Maybe the buyer only wants, you know, the sports betting license, but he doesn't care about the casino license, or he only wants, you know, the client base, but doesn't really care about the softwares, or the license and the client base, but doesn't care about the software. So in this case, what we think, to try to make it a full fit as well, is that the company selling can try to split itself and sell to different buyers the different parts that he has. So, for example, if you have if you have a betting license and a casino license, and you want to stop your business because you're losing a lot of money, okay, you can sell the casino license to one of the buyers. I mean, when I say sell the casino license, I don't mean transferring the license, okay, because this is illegal. I mean putting that license in a company as a spin-off. You do a spin-off, you put it under a company, or you do a contribution of a branch and put it under a company, and then sell that company, okay? So then you maximize your price on that, but you still keep the rest. Okay, so you still keep the other license, you still keep maybe the client base, which are in this other license. So you try to maximize as much as you can. Or if you're going to close, maybe you sell the licenses, but then the client base, you do some transaction to transfer the client base. This is risky business, okay? But always with the consent of the end user and accepting all the terms and conditions, and in a marketing promotional way to put users from one operator to another one. Of course, he has to do the sign up or with the new one. Of course, he has to register. So I'm not talking about transferring databases like this. But what you need to know is the framework of spin-offs, branches, full sales, how to do this, or other type of agreements to maximize all the different parts that the operator has. Okay, so I think anyone that prepares for this type of process needs to know the framework. I mean, that's the legal framework of the options.
Yeah,
I think that's very important.
Do you predict a lot more activity in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I was mentioning, that we see that there's buyers coming. Maybe there's not yet sellers, because many of the new operators are just getting their license and are just getting it homologated and certified and are just launching. But unfortunately, maybe in for them, maybe in half a year, 1 year, maybe there will also be more offer of companies willing to sell or willing to get majority investment. Or even, they can also think on mergers, maybe two small gambling operators which are not viable, maybe they can merge and they can make a viable small one, out of two which, separately could not make it. So you can also think, M&A is mergers and acquisitions, although I only talk about acquisitions, but maybe we can also think about mergers of smaller companies.
Sorry. Very quick. That's why it's very important, very important also to be compliant from the very first day, to make life easier after with the subsequent due diligence process in case of M&A. With those new ones, for example.
Exactly, and to summarize, the main drivers for M&A activity in the future will be, as explained by Xavier, first of all, the fact that there are more than, if you take a look at the list of authorized operators in the website of the DGOJ, I think there are more than 70, almost 80 operators with general licenses. That could be a lot or not, who knows? It could also depend on how the future politics and the future regulation on marketing develops. But most important, and another important factor is that even though there was a licensing window recently closed, there is still interest from certain operators that missed that window and from certain companies to still be present in the Spanish market. So that's also very positive. And of course, the fact that the license itself cannot be traded, so you cannot trade the license by itself. You have to sell the company that has the license within. M&A activity is certainly a big trend to follow.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to be strict and end there so we can get to lunch. So we're going to do a 45-minute lunch now, and so that will bring us back in here about 3:25, if that's okay with everyone. So before we go, just like to thank our panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you back here in 45.